Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. On today's show, we welcome G-Man Choi and welcome back Luke Voit to the Mets. We also do last call on free agency, Brett Baty's offseason, and Francisco Alvarez contract rumors. As always, we close out the show answering your mailbag questions. So subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can watch on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And here's your reminder to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined, as always, by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. Not only today, but also on Saturday. The Mets Pod is flying south this week for spring training. Check out our live show from Port St. Lucie on Saturday, February 24th at noon Eastern, right before the Mets' first spring training game. We'll be right outside the main entrance to Clover Park. So if you're in town and at the game, please stop by, say hello. If you're not there, you can still watch the show live on SNY's YouTube channel and, of course, all of SNY's social platforms. We'll post the show afterwards in our usual podcast feed. So if you already subscribed to the feed, you're getting the show right away, no matter what. But if you want to watch it right before the first spring training game, you have nothing to do before the first spring training game at 12 o'clock, we will be on and super, super excited to get down there. We're looking forward to seeing everybody down there as well. So once again, please stop by and say hello on your way into the game. All right, Joe, a lot there. We're just a couple days away. I can't wait, man. I am one of those people that I get excited to watch the first spring training game and the coverage around it, usually here in New York. The fact that we're going to go down, we're going to be at camp for a day, so we'll have more coverage around that as well. But more importantly, our actual live show at Clover Park, man. I've never been to Clover Park. It's going to be really exciting.
It's going to be great. And, we're getting down to Florida, getting out of the Northeast cold, and it's truly kicking off baseball season. It's going there, being there for the first game. I think I told you, like, that game basically always sells out. So there's there're going to be a lot of people there, and just getting ready for ball, man. That's what it's all about.
It really is. And obviously, before we get to that show, we still have plenty to go over with the Mets as they are fully underway with their spring training. We've gotten to hear from everybody, whether it's from the manager, Carlos Mendoza, Pete Alonso's there. Obviously, we fielded a ton of questions about his contract situation, which, obviously he's going to defer and leave most of those conversations behind closed doors. We've seen plenty of Francisco Lindor, a very confident, as always, Jet Williams, Joe. But before we get to the usual Mets or the younger Mets, we welcome in some new faces. The Mets, maybe it's not the DH situation Mets fans are hoping for, but it's absolutely depth for the minors that could ultimately end up on the big league team at some point. First off with G-Man Choi, a new face, and Luke Voit, a not-so-new face. It felt like Luke Voit there was a month in Syracuse where Luke Voit hit a home run every single day, sometimes with sleeves, sometimes without sleeves. But before we get to Luke Voit, Joe, G-Man Choi, what an interesting player. I feel like a lot of Mets fans probably familiar with him because when he was with the Rays, he was somewhat of a Yankees killer, even in the postseason as well, a really interesting player. And then after the Rays moved on from him, and this is kind of what happens with the Rays a lot, and he's in his early 30s, he's just fallen off a cliff, notably the last two seasons, Joe, but 2023 was a really, really tough one for him where obviously now he's just on a spring training minor league kind of invite situation with the Mets.
He's historically dominated Garrett Cole for whatever reason. He's just one of those guys. Like, I remember I was watching Mets yearbook for this past year on SNY, and I don't remember this happening in the moment, but Victor Caratini hit a home run off Max Scherzer, and just like this random backup catcher, just his career numbers, he dominated Max Scherzer. So
Trent
for whatever
Grisham?
Reason, yeah, I mean, Trent Grisham, we don't want to get into him. We had enough of him in that
you and I were
series.
there at that disaster.
Yeah. But G-Man Choi, like you said, a lot of things have kind of fallen off. He does splits at first base. That's pretty cool. So he's like a sneaky athlete kind of guy. But realistically, I think he is exactly kind of how you describe it. It's depth. I would expect he would be a guy that would start in AAA Syracuse and be ready for a call. And it's just a matter of David Stearns building up the cupboard with legitimate major league type of players, even at the AAA level, because there are going to be injuries. There's going to be underperformance. And having someone like G-Man Choi is just cool. It's an extra body. And he can help the AAA Syracuse lineup probably on opening day.
So I know Choi was very, very briefly with the Brewers in 2018, which, obviously would align with Stearns being there as well. But ironically enough, Joe, I was looking this up when I was just going through Choi's very interesting career. He's bounced around ever. This isn't a new situation to him. He's been on minor league contracts before and had to find a way to make it in the majors. Really, all of his success came with Tampa Bay. He hit his first career grand slam as a pinch hitter for the Brewers. And then the next day they traded him to the Rays. And he was very productive for the Rays for about 3-4 years, I would say, where really with his game, Joe, it's always that he's a guy that could just get on base, right? He's not someone that plays around the field. He's not somebody that typically hits for a very high average, but his on-base percentage is, kind of his calling card, and the fact that he obviously has pop as well. So I guess ultimately, Joe, this is nothing to really go in depth on, because for him to make the team, one, somebody would have to get hurt, and two, it feels like a lot would have to go wrong. And he also needs to prove that he's not the player that was a shell of himself in 2023. I think with Voit, on the other hand, this feels like a player that, and they had no interest in calling him up last year, no matter how many home runs he hit in Syracuse. But I will say this, Joe, and I kind of want your thought. Voit has had stretches of being a legitimate major leaguer with a legitimate power bat, and he's hit over 20 home runs in 3 different seasons throughout his major league career. And he did that in 2022, so you don't have to look too far away to think about that. If Vientos, and we don't want this to happen, but completely falls on his face with his at-bats, and a guy like DJ Stewart gets hurt or something, those two very minor things, I think we could see Luke Voit in a Mets uniform before July, quite honestly, Joe.
I think when you look at the young players like Vientos and Baty, while they're going to get a significant opportunity here, to your point, that opportunity is not you get the whole season no matter how you're performing. Because while the Mets do want to assess for 2025, David Stearns has made it as clear as possible. And I know fans may not agree. There could be varying opinions on that. But he believes he built a playoff team, and he is not backing down from that. So if Mark Vientos is struggling, then Luke Voit, to your point, has proven to, at minimum, be a power bat. What else you're going to get? Who knows? But he could hit home runs. It was like 14 in 32 games, I believe, for AAA Syracuse last year, or something crazy like that. Like basically every other day, he hit a home run in AAA. So it's insurance for the young players. And I know there are some fans that have said that it's wrong that the Mets are just gifting the position to Mark Vientos. They're just gifting the position to Brett Baty. So I think it's just another sign of David Stearns protecting the organization and also just being ready for the worst case scenario to potentially play out. And that brings a guy like Luke Voit into play. And he certainly has experience with Carlos Mendoza, as Voit was a Yankee.
All right, so a couple of last notes here on free agency, as I don't want to say free agency winds down, because there are so many notable names out there as we record this show, Joe. I mean, Blake Snell is out there, right? Obviously, Jordan Montgomery is still out there as well. You have Cody Bellinger, Chapman. There's just a lot of
the Boris Five, JD Martinez, like
JD Mart. Yeah, the Boris Five that's a really good way to put it, and no surprise there. He will wait and be patient to get what he feels his clients deserve. Brandon Woodruff, though, ultimately goes back to the Brewers. We thought it would be a 2-year deal wherever Woodruff went, Joe, because a lot of people think he's not even going to be able to pitch this year. If he did surprisingly come back, you're looking at maybe September at the earliest. Obviously, when you're dealing with shoulder injuries, it's not as cut and dried, I feel like, as just Tommy John is, or something along those lines, where, hey, the success rate of returning from this surgery now is really, really high, and here's the time frame it takes. With a shoulder, it can end a guy's career, it can really worsen his stuff, or maybe he comes back and is fine. I just think there's more volatility or variance is what I'm trying to say, Joe. Were you surprised, though, it was the Brewers at the end of this? You and I were a fan of Woodruff specifically for the Mets because of the thought the Mets are going to really put the pedal to the metal next offseason. Offensively, we think they're going to be after Soto. We think they're going to make an aggressive offer to keep Pete Alonso around. But the rotation could have 3+ open spots in it where you'd like to get some insurance going into that year as well.
It felt like kind of an almost obvious move for the Mets to sign someone like Brandon Woodruff. You're going to get obviously a lower value than what he would be if he was fully healthy and in free agency. And you kind of plug one of those spots for 2025 that are certainly up in the air as to, are there going to be young players? Will a Christian Scott or Mike Vassell claim a spot or two? They're certainly going to have to add pitching next offseason one way or another. And is it surprising he went back to the Brewers? I guess he's comfortable there. He knows the medical staff, so that works as far as that goes. But with the capsule shoulder injury that he had surgery on, I know medicine has progressed certainly since then, but this is the surgery that essentially ended Johan Santana's career. He was not the same after he had this surgery. So I would think the Mets looked into the medicals and maybe they didn't feel comfortable about paying for that risk. Instead, they will, look elsewhere. Like we can talk about other players that are still out on free agency that maybe come into play if the markets really fall apart, or of course they'll have to be aggressive less than 12 months from now.
Yeah, that's really what it'll come down to. And yeah, you make a great point that, this is a surgery that has ended notable careers before, but for Milwaukee, for both sides of it, they kind of know what they're getting. He's obviously happy there. A really well-respected guy. So I do want to look at the rest of the pitching market because you tweeted about this and it was really, really interesting. And the short, crux of it was essentially, hey, I wasn't interested. I'll just read it verbatim. You said, can Jordan Montgomery's market fall enough that it fits the Mets price point from a length perspective? I didn't want him at 5 to 6 years, 2 to 3. Sure. They still lack proven 2025 rotation options other than Senga. Because as we always remind everybody on this show, Manaea has an opt-out after next year, and he just used it this year. So if Manaea is decent enough that you want him in the rotation for next year, he's probably going to opt out. So I think that you bring up a great point, Joe, that if Montgomery is not getting the term that he's seeking, maybe this is a situation where the Mets, and we don't expect this, by the way, but we're at least entertaining it, the Mets can actually get someone that would help them this year and then also help them for that new window opening the following year.
If Manaea does not opt out, then we're probably not going to want him on the team if he doesn't opt out.
That's how that works.
But with Jordan Montgomery, I'm at the point, and we talked about him all winter, and I know you, Connor, you were a big fan of Jordan Montgomery and had interest in the Mets pursuing him. I was always on the other side of the coin because I simply read what everyone else read, that it appeared his market was trending to 5 years, 6 years. At some point in time, these guys are going to sign. They're not going to just not play baseball anymore. So they're going to take a contract. And I'm sure Boris is just waiting out for injuries to happen in spring training. And then maybe a team is a little more desperate and they'll just kind of give the contract that Boris has wanted all along. But I would be investigating Jordan Montgomery. There's no qualifying offer attached, which is why I don't want Blake Snell regardless of cost. I don't want Chapman. I don't want Bellinger. Jordan Montgomery, if I can whittle him down to 2 years, 3 years, you could throw an opt-out in there if you want, whatever kind of makes him happy. At that point, I think that would heighten the floor of the 2024 Mets and also providing an option for the 2025 Mets rotation because, look, Andy Martino reported for SNY, Juan Soto going to be a free agent. Pete Alonso going to be a free agent. He talked to executives that are like, Steve Cohen might go for both. It's pretty hard to fill.
I think he will.
3. Yeah, but I mean, when you think big picture, it's pretty hard to fill 3 rotation spots and also pursue Pete Alonso and also pursue Juan Soto. And you signed all these relievers to 1-year deals. You're going to want to add a couple relievers. It puts so much on the plate that it's kind of hard to accomplish it all. So if Jordan Montgomery's market slides a little bit down as far as length goes, it's tough to say like what the average per year salary would be. You would think higher for a shorter term deal. But if that length falls, Jordan Montgomery has now entered my level of interest.
Right, because it's a little bit, and we've had this exact conversation, right, around a lot of different players for the Mets. It's a little bit of you're planning for what we think. There's going to be a lot of hype around the Mets, I think, in 2025. And a lot of people listening to this don't want to hear that right now. And I don't blame you. We're going to focus on the 2024 Mets. But Joe and I, being obsessed with team building, that's the nature of this show, are always going to call things back to the future while also looking at the now. And with Montgomery, it's in your scenario, Joe, not in the 5 to 6 year window. I agree with you. In your scenario, the 3-year window, you get the best of both because it enhances your odds of being a wild card team this year. I mean, if you plug Montgomery into the top of this rotation next to Senga, it changes your entire. Then one guy gets hurt. Oh, Adrian Hauser's the next man up. I like the sound of that, right? It just kind of changes everything. But then you look at next year, like you said, you go into the offseason, and it feels like your blueprint's a little easier because we would love for some of these young guys to be written in starters for next year, whether that's Vassell, on and on and on. A couple of them, if one of them is good enough this year that he's written in ink to be in the rotation next year, I think that's a win. But baseball is just not that easy. I mean, think about how many young arms we've seen in our lifetime come and go that they just didn't have it. They get hurt, or they're really good year one and they get figured out after that. So yeah, it's an interesting name. Once again, our expectations are a little low. We do think the Mets are ultimately done this offseason right now, but you always say this, Joe, and I agree with you. These guys got to play at some point. And some teams, unlike the Mets, truly do close the checkbook. There's nothing in the world that will get them to open it back up. They did all their spending. They are ready for baseball to take place. I think with Steve Cohen and maybe a handful of other owners in the league, the checkbook never really closes. Maybe your budget was written in pencil or even in pen, and then the whiteout comes out. Oh, we would do that. We would do this. We would pivot for that. We didn't expect this. And I think that's something I hope to see more from the Mets in future years under this ownership, is being able to pivot when a unique opportunity presents itself.
We used the word opportunistic a lot like a year ago, and that's where we want to see the Mets be. And that's kind of what David Stearns said at one of his press conferences this spring. He talked about, I think there was a question, if so-and-so's market were to dip, are you still in play? And he was like, yeah, of course. So the offseason doesn't end for the Mets. And to your point, there's quotes from other GMs on other teams that basically said it's time to focus on the players we have in camp. And that's just the end of that. David Stearns left open the possibility. And I always go back to that Francisco Lindor quote in the locker room last week or whenever that was, because all the days run together with press availability in spring training, where he kind of implied that Stearns said there was a move or two potentially still coming. And I mean, maybe that was G-Man Choi and Luke Voit, and we got the two moves that David Stearns was referencing. But something tells me that they're going to be open-minded to any possibility if it makes sense within their window.
All right, so let's move on. One really interesting column this week that came out was from Tim Britton of The Athletic. It was basically on Brett Baty and if he can rebound from a really tough rookie season, and went into what Brett has done this offseason, watched a ton of video. A direct quote of his main takeaway of watching all that video was, my top hand was a huge thing. I just needed to get that stronger and really just try to be more direct with the top hand. Joe, what did you take away from that quote of Baty on his video study? And what do you think it is with Baty? Because I was thinking about this earlier this week. We had such promising expectations for him. We didn't think Baty would be a superstar, but we thought Baty would come up and be able to hit. And he was a guy that can hit gap to gap, drive the ball, big doubles hitter. And it felt like Joe, not only was he not seeing pitches well, but even when he was making contact, it was interesting how all of that promise of serious bat to ball ability in the minors fell on its face last year, and what he has to do to get back to being himself this year.
Sometimes when things really fall apart, you almost have to go back to basics and go back to just the basic fundamentals of hitting, because especially in the modern day game, there's so much information being thrown at you. It could make your head spin. All right, you're not doing this. You're not doing this. Try this. So he went back to basics, and Jeremy Barnes was quoted in that article as well, assistant hitting coach, and something that I honestly never thought of. He's like, Brett, as a righty thrower and lefty hitter, his non-dominant hand is actually his top hand, and your top hand is really the most important hand in a baseball swing, because that's going to help you elevate the ball, or in Brett's case, when he is not right, he just rolls over and he just tops the ball, on the ground in the infield. So I'm interested to see how it looks this spring. Stats are not going to be certainly of high importance. David Stearns even mentioned that, not to put too much stock into statistics within spring training. But I'm hopeful that we could see Brett Baty do what he did his whole minor league career, which was be confident and elevate the ball. And if he's able to control that top hand, I think that'll allow him to put the ball in the air. And he hits the ball hard. That's the one thing, right? Like, he was hitting a lot of balls into the ground, but he would hit them with exit velocity. So he knows how to barrel the ball and hit the ball hard. Now he just needs to focus on his swing path, focus on his top hand. And I think that can certainly have a chance to unlock power within Brett Baty's bat.
Our last bit of news, the open of the show here. There's been, rumor. Hector Gomez said that the Mets could be close to working on an extension with Francisco Alvarez. SNY's Andy Martino said that wasn't the case. He said, "Why?" He did say, "Hey, it makes sense for the Mets to look to extend Francisco Alvarez, in the future, but they're not close right now." Rumors aside, Joe, because we don't have any actual concrete news at the moment, I still think this is an interesting topic. Some Mets fans might fully just be like, "What? Francisco Alvarez was a rookie last year. Why would you need to extend him?" The real, basic element of it is you could buy out the arbitration years. It's not only a good relations effort for a player you believe in, but it also could save you some money down the road. Maybe you do get the extension to go into a free agency year or two, or maybe you do save some money if the player ends up being exactly what you expect, where he'd outperform the arbitration, projection anyway. Joe, do you think this is something that the Braves are notorious for doing? A lot of organizations have really caught on to this, but we have not seen the Mets be able to capitalize on this. And Alvarez seems like, to be fair, they haven't had a lot of young players where this opportunity always made a ton of sense, but Alvarez seems like the type of player that it's almost a no-brainer.
This is the one to do it with. I am not, I understand what the Braves do, but they operate within a different prism than the Mets are operating. The Braves do that because they wouldn't be able to keep all of these guys long term. Like, they certainly can spend money, but they're not keeping all these guys at market value. The Mets, on the other hand, can pay market value if a player warrants it. But I think, to your point, Connor, it's a good relationship thing, and from Alvarez's side, if they were to work something out, it's protection for him. It's guaranteed money, because anything could happen. He could get injured. He could not live up to the expectations that I, and everyone seemingly has for him. So it's just some financial protection on his side. And then on the Mets side, if you believe in Francisco Alvarez, then you're probably looking at it as, we're getting a steal on a catcher throughout, into his late 20s, or however the length of the deal would look. And Alvarez, what he's shown to me is the off the field and the on field kind of line up. So he looks like a good investment. The work that he puts in as a catcher that nobody sees is so underappreciated. We kind of overlooked the fact that Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer started requesting to throw to Alvarez. A few months before that, we were talking about, is Alvarez even a catcher at the big league level? And he's proven through hard work that he is a major league catcher, if not a plus defensive catcher at the major league level. So don't know if something's going to come of this, but if there is a player that the Mets are going to give a long-term contract to, other than Pete Alonso, because I know Mets fans want that, Francisco Alvarez stands out to me as just a obvious candidate, and I think it would work for both sides.
And with Alvarez, to be fair, he is a little bit of a different situation than Alonso, where he came up
Sure.
and had success as a 21-year-old, where
Yeah.
Pete was 24 or 25, Joe, when he came up.
Yeah, he was, a year or two removed from being a college senior. The only reason I threw Alonso in there is because my words were, if there's one Met that they should extend,
yes.
I was like,
good
caveat.
caveat.
let me cover my bases, because I think we'd get a lot of comments and responses. What about Pete Alonso? So other than Alonso, I think Alvarez is the guy you would look to extend.
I think so as well. I mean, you're talking about somebody that there's a world where I know captains aren't as big of a thing in baseball anymore, but Alvarez could be looked at as essentially the leader of this entire team. I mean, that's how highly thought of I think he already is at his age, and somebody who has success with the organization for a very, very long time. All right, you're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. All right, Joe, a lot of good mailbag questions this week. Honestly, some were just really, really funny that I had to get into our show. This first one from Evan Chips. If you were to compare some of the new faces on the Mets 40-man roster with Citi Food staples, who would be what? Example, I feel like Adrian Hauser is akin to a Premio sausage sandwich, high floor, low ceiling, innings eater. And there was a follow-up to this from Nick Pauly, who said Severino is like the Apple ice cream helmet. Amazing stuff, not necessarily healthy.
Well, I would say stadium food is not my
Who's the
my
hot dog,
level
Joe?
of
We know
expertise.
all you do when you go to Citi Field is you get a hot dog and a beer. You're good to go, which I respect this, by the way. You don't need any of the flair. Tell me, who is the hot dog of the Mets? Old reliable.
Adrian Hauser. He's coming in. I don't know if there's a lot of upside to what you're going to get. It's not going to be bad. It's not going to be great, probably. Largely what you're getting with Adrian Hauser. He's going to be a perfectly fine back-end type of starter. He feels like, that you can't really mess that up. So that feels like a Hauser to me.
All right, I got one for this. The Pat LaFrida steak sandwich, which is my personal favorite at Citi Field. It is truly phenomenal. That's Edwin Diaz, because you don't get it every time you go to Citi Field. You don't. But it is the cream of the crop. There's nothing else like it when it's done right. And once again, when you go to Citi Field, you don't always get to see Edwin Diaz pitch. But when you do, you walk away from your ballpark experience just a little bit different. So the Pat LaFrida steak sandwich is Edwin Diaz. The reason I asked this is because I enjoyed Nick's follow-up so much, and the question, of course, from Evan, that I want people to respond with theirs. I feel like the Mets fan,
yes,
this is something...
Leave in the YouTube comments. I look at the YouTube comments. We need to get more commenting in the YouTube. Leave review, get us on Twitter, all that stuff that matters. Let us know your Citi Field food to new player comparison.
All right, a tougher one here. Christopher Schulz. You and Connor are starting a slow pitch softball team. Pick a Met from each decade to fill out the roster. So I feel like we work backwards on this, because there's some there's some layups here. I mean, Pete is the choice from this decade.
As long as home runs are allowed. There's some leagues that they don't allow home runs or outs. I don't know if that's
really?
Lower level.
I've never played that way. That's
I think
interesting.
It's probably lower level, but if we're gonna be competitive, I mean, obviously Pete is. I think Pete would hit 950 with a home run almost every time in slow pitch softball.
So to make this easier, we'll count Pete from the 2020 and on decade. He won't count from 2010 to 2019. So Joe, that gives us. Do you have to go Cespedes for the 2010 decade?
We're just coming out with big mashers, and we're
gonna get speed. We're gonna get speed, but I mean, when you're building the team, you're looking for two guys that can just hit the ball 700 feet.
Yeah, Cespedes, Alonso, put them 3-4, and I think we take it from there. And I think I know what we're going to do.
Great defensively at the moment.
Oh, it's good. Cespedes is fine as long as his heels work and everything. I'm focusing on the time when the Mets traded for Cespedes, and he actually played center field perfectly fine after they got him.
Here's the hardest one, genuinely the hardest one, the 2000s, because can go with the speed of Reyes. You can go with one of the greatest Mets ever in David Wright. Honestly, Joe, my pick for this is Carlos Beltran from the 2000s.
You want defense, and now you have
speed, power.
Beltran. Speed, power. Beltran was my favorite Met on like the 05, 06, those good teams. Despite Wright and Reyes being homegrown and everything, Beltran was always my favorite. So sign me up for Carlos Beltran playing left center or right center in a slow pitch softball team.
I think people, especially this era of statistics, often forget this, Joe. I forget it until we start doing this podcast. In 2006, Beltran had a 388 on base percentage. In a year, he hit 41 home runs and stole 18 bases when the rules were still the old rules. Basically, that season today with a 982 OPS. 982 while playing a Gold Glove outfield. He was fourth in the MVP voting that year. I believe he won a Gold Glove that year, of course. He was an all-star, Silver Slugger. It's just, I know it's weird with Beltran because of the way that year ended, but I think I would say about 90% of Mets fans, because of the way that year ended, don't realize statistically how freakish of a season that was. Honestly, Joe, how many Mets seasons are better than that?
Almost, I don't know if any, almost none. Like, ultimately, Beltran was a 5-tool player, and we throw that term around very often, and kind of erroneously. Carlos Beltran was a true 5-tool player, and hopefully he finds his place in the Baseball Hall of Fame here in the next year or two.
So you agree with me, Beltran's the 2000s pick, which is tough because all those great teams. You could we got our mashers already in Cespedes and Pete, but Delgado and Cliff Floyd would be great choices for this. There's
Sean Green was sneaky good.
That's a good point.
They had so many good players.
For the 90s, do we have to go back to the well of Piazza?
I don't think Piazza provides the same value. A catcher in slow pitch softball? Does Piazza provide the same value?
Then who?
What about this? He didn't hit. He didn't hit much.
You going Ray Ordonez?
You throw Ray Ordonez at shortstop. He's going to scoop up every ball.
Yeah,
he got everything in the major leagues. You think the guy just coming from the bar to play slow pitch softball is hitting a ball past Ray Ordonez? Not a chance.
You're not wrong, honestly. The fact that you're balancing the team. We are building a team here. We're not just picking the best Met. Oh, man. You know what, though? Another really good one is Edgardo Alfonso from the 90s.
My favorite Met of all time.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Alfonso, another guy, in 99, 385 on base percentage while hitting 27 home runs, 108 RBIs. He stole 9 bases. He actually was people probably forget when it wasn't that old. He was a good enough athlete in the field. But what's so funny about this one is that you could say Ricky Henderson for the 90s Met as well.
That's crazy.
Right?
That's crazy to think.
Henderson, because he played for so long and for so many teams, but in 99, as a 40-year-old for the Mets, Henderson had an 889 OPS and stole 37 bases. It's 40. He was 40.
Yeah. What a monster.
Oh man. All right, we'll do I think we do the 80s and then probably put a bow on it as much as there's probably some old school fans out there. If you want to pick one from the 60s and the 70s, please please tweet them at us, write them on the pod reviews, however you want to do it. Yell at us at spring training. The 80s, Joe, maybe another one like the 2000s that is very, very difficult to pick. I have a really sneaky one here, so I'm going to let you go first. I have a really sneaky one here.
I like Straw. I think Straw's a pretty good candidate.
It's hard not to take Straw.
Maybe Chalk a little bit. Lenny Dykstra. You need that crazy guy on your slow pitch softball team. So Lenny could certainly be in play. But who's your sneaky guy?
My sneaky one that it wouldn't be my actual pick, but I think deserves credit. And his best years were not with the Mets. But we're talking about slow pitch softball. We're looking for athleticism and power. Would be Kevin Mitchell. Kevin Mitchell, as a 24-year-old with the Mets, was really good in 86. He had an 811 OPS. But Mitchell in 89, when he won the MVP with the Giants as a 27-year-old, hit 47 home runs and had an OPS over 1,000. His slugging was 635. So that's one where, yeah, it's pretty insane. But it's hard not to go with Straw. We already took Pete, so you can't take Keith because you don't need another first baseman.
Right. You don't care about pitchers. You're not. I mean,
you don't care. You don't.
Softball.
That's that. Yeah, exactly. You don't care about the pitchers. So okay, so I'll put a bow on it like this, Joe. What pitcher do you take, knowing that you need somebody that can hit and is athletic? Is it DeGrom?
I mean, the Mets haven't had a hitting pitcher like DeGrom. Syndergaard is in play as a hitting pitcher. I think he had a 2-homer game in LA, right?
He did.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So DeGrom's the most natural hitter. I mean, there was years during the tough times of being a Mets fan that DeGrom was like, his OPS was like, would have been like 6th in the lineup on a day where he was pitching. So DeGrom is kind of that hitting pitcher for you.
Yeah, it has to be, and a great athlete as well that you need out there. So it's a really fun question that there's just so many ways you can go through. It makes you realize, as much as, us Mets fans can feel jaded at times, there's been a lot of great athletes that have played for the team over the last couple of decades that it really, really is a tough debate. All right, the last question. Okay.
Hold on. I wonder if R.A. Dickey could throw an underhand knuckleball. I don't know if that's possible.
If we ever...
But imagine you had a knuckleball. Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I mean, I think ultimately, to your point, he could probably do some really funky stuff with a softball if you asked him. When you are a Cy Young caliber pitcher as a knuckleballer and reinvented yourself to be that way, I mean, your grasp of the baseball is just on a unique planet that, not even 1% of major leaguers could even calibrate. So, all right, the last one from James Loesch. And I wanted to conclude with this because I think it is what a lot of people are wondering right now as we get some more positive vibes in spring training. I keep talking myself into this team having an extra 10 to 15 wins over last year's team. Am I crazy? Figuring rotation stays reasonably healthy. The rookies coming up add 1 to 3 wins in value. Core guys, Alonso, McNeil, return to average or above average output. Diaz is back. So I'll frame it to you like this, Joe. Which of those 4 things are you the most concerned about or have the most doubt in? I know it's not Diaz. We could scrap that right away.
Yeah.
I agree.
I mean, I would think it's the young players coming up and providing like 1 to 3 wins. Like, not impossible, but it depends on when it's a lot to ask. Especially, we don't know when they're going to come up. Like, it could be May, it could be June, July. It really depends on team need. But I don't think you're crazy at all. Like, I think what the Mets did in 2023 is not reflective of the talent that's on the team. And maybe what they did in 2022 wasn't quite reflective either. Like, it feels like maybe they're somewhere in the middle of those things. And I think, frankly, they're being looked at as they're being looked at as a non-contender. They're being looked at, there's all these negative things. But you look up and down the National League, realistically, it's the Dodgers, the Braves, the Phillies, and then everyone else is kind of lumped in this area. Like, you can say you like Arizona a little more than Cincinnati or whatever, but it's not this loaded National League that it's like this absolute blasphemous concept that the Mets can win 85 games instead of the 75 that they did in 2023. So don't think you're crazy at all. Frankly, I think the Mets are going to be an above 500 team as they're currently constructed, and there's room for improvement now or at the trade deadline, young players coming. So no, not crazy at all.
I think the point about the rotation staying healthy, of course, that's an obvious one. But back to the young players, that would probably be it for me, because Alvarez had a 1 overall WAR last year, 1.0 win above replacement. Baty, negative 0.8. Vientos, negative 1.1. So that's a big, really big milestone or movement, where Alvarez being a 1 win above replacement player next year, sure. Like, I'd be surprised if he's not, right? I think he'll hit 25 home runs again. I think the average will be a little higher. He's not the guy, but he said in the framing of this question, rookies coming up add 1 to 3 wins in value. So I think what that comes down to for me, Joe, is that can Baty and Vientos get in the positive, even if it's 0.4, and then the second half of the year, you get a spark from one of Gilbert, Acuna, Jet would be pretty wild, but I'm never going to say no. You know that.
I ain't putting it past him.
I'm not putting it past him at all. I really liked that they asked him if he was 6 feet tall, what would he be in terms of prospects in baseball? And he said the top.
Yeah, he's like, I'd be number one. I'd be the number one prospect.
He's 100% right. So that's how you do the math is what do you need to get there? And the answer is you need either Vientos and Baty to be capable major leaguers, and then you don't really need much, or one of Vientos or Baty to be a somewhat capable major leaguer and a significant spark from what we call the unknown. Gilbert, Acuna, Jet, and then let's not forget one of the pitchers as well, Joe, if a spot opened up or whatever it may be. But I think that's, and you sum it up really well that it's, we look at it, an extra 10 wins is 85 wins for the Mets. I mean, I think the Marlins had 84, 85 wins last year. So it's not this mountain to climb that's anything insane.
No, it's not insane at all. And look, I think it's going to be fun. You talking about Drew Gilbert coming up and Acuna coming up, maybe Jet Williams, Christian Scott, Mike Vassell, Dom Hamill. There's plenty of names that we can go through. I think that's what makes this season, it's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun season to follow. Like, if you like baseball, I think you're going to like what the Mets put out. There's going to be defense. They're going to be fundamentally sound. And there's going to be an infusion of young players. So it's a good kind of look ahead, while it may not be that World Series expectation that the Mets have had the last couple of years. It's a heck of a lot easier to exceed lower expectations than it is to meet, the Dodgers are loaded and they're projected over 100 wins. Like, they'll probably do it, but I mean, it's a lot harder to live up to those expectations than it is to exceed 80.5 with, we talk about the talent on this team. Edwin Diaz coming back, Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Brandon Nimmo, Starling Marte saying he thinks he could play 170 games, which means he's already planning for the playoffs, which is great news. There's no reason why this team can't do it. Now it's just a matter of going out day in and day out and proving it. That's what it's going to come down to.
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons that, a lot of people loved watching a team like the Diamondbacks last year. They were young, they were athletic, and that's why they were a big riser. Obviously, the Orioles in a different capacity because they had what felt like 80 first-round picks just coming up from the minors every other day.
And they still have like 7 or 8 top 100 prospects.
And they're able. That's how they're able to trade for Corbin Burns pretty easily. So I don't think the Mets are, in that capacity. But you're right, Joe. A season where expectations are dialed down and a lot of young players are going to appear with the big league club. That's an environment that typically creates a lot of optimism. When something goes right, Joe, it feels like it went twice as good, right? Yeah. Rather than when you go into a season with 100-win expectation with all I would say old players. When something goes wrong, it feels like it goes twice as bad. So now we kind of had the full inverse of that, and that's what makes this season ultimately really, really interesting for the Met fan.
I can't wait to watch. I can't wait to be at spring training.
That's right.
I mean, here we're recording on Tuesday. We'll be in the air in less than 48 hours, and we'll be in Port St. Lucie. Stay tuned to our Twitter accounts. We're going to have a lot of coverage on Friday. And of course, if you are in St. Lucie and you are planning to go to the first game on Saturday, make sure you come see us. We'll be right near the entrance, like Connor said at the outset of the show. I think it's going to be through speakers, so you're going to hear us. So just follow the sound, and you'll see us. So come say hi, and if not, make sure you check it out because this is the actual official kickoff of baseball.
This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Elevate your style in a Cadillac. Go from bold to bolder in an SUV, from inspiring to awe-inspiring in a sedan. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And our final reminder that we'll have our live show from Port St. Lucie on Saturday, February 24th. That show will, of course, be in our podcast feed. As always, for those of you that can't attend or watch it live, it will be in the feed. And remember, subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts so you don't miss any of our episodes. You can also subscribe on Spotify, you can watch on SNY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your shows. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you in Port St. Lucie.